Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. Now I'm going to wrap up 3 fights in this video. The Nathan Gorman and Razvan Caggiano one, the Carlos Takam and SENAD GASHI fight, and of course the David Price and Tom Little fight. But I'll start with the Takam and GASHI fight because that's the fight I've just seen. I've got some fresh thoughts on that. Now this was really a tale of sort of 2 halves in terms of the fight. The first 4 rounds were absolutely dreadful viewing. I was thinking, what have we got ourselves into here? Because SENAD GASHI, you know, he's an unheralded German fighter, but his record is basically comprised of first round KOs. So he is a bit of a banger. I've seen some of his fights. He really just goes for it. So to see him basically off on his bike, circling the ring, staying out of range, he was cagey for those first 4 rounds. It was quite interesting. He was obviously respectful of Carlos Takam, the level that Takam has been at and the power that he's got, and he wanted no part of him in the early going. But it got me thinking, you know, after the 4th round, and I even tweeted about this, was part of this, well, one, I tweeted it was a bit of a ball fest, not what I was expecting, but also, was he looking to potentially gas Takam as Takam gassed against Derek Chisora? But then round 5, it broke into a fight. GASHI had obviously decided the circling he'd had enough, and he looked to start to stand and trade with Carlos Takam. And the fight, it was on. That was a great round 5. Both guys were having, you know, consistent success, just really swinging for the fences. Heavy leather was thrown. Good round, very good round. But in round 6, Carlos Takam started to get on top there. He was landing more than he was taking. You know, he was certainly dishing out the punishment in GASHI. He was starting to feel the effect of it. He was starting to look a little bit ragged in terms of his breathing. And at that point, at the end of that round, you know, I even tweeted about this. I thought the fight was destined for a stoppage for Carlos Takam sooner rather than later. And then it came in round 7. GASHI, he was, you know, chin up in the air. He was begging to be clipped, and he was. He was down 3 times in the round. Carlos Takam all over him, and it was a pretty decent effort by Takam in those 3 rounds. The first 4 rounds, I've got to say, the tactics, being on his bike, it didn't make Carlos Takam look great. He looked every bit of those 38 years old, and I was thinking, well, if this ends up petering out to some, you know, pedestrian decision to Takam, you know, it's not going to look good for his prospects. So fortunately, it broke out into a fight in round 5, and Takam obviously started to look pretty good. You know, the close quarters action really suits Carlos Takam with that sort of opponent. And yeah, GASHI, he was begging to be clipped. He was. And Carlos Takam in the end got a pretty decent stoppage. And you could make an argument that it should have been stopped after the 2nd knockdown. But the referee for this fight was the same referee for the David Price fight, and he was criticised heavily, even on air by Paulie Malignaggi, for stopping that fight early. And I'll get to that in a moment. But Carlos Takam, he will move on to a bigger fight in 2019. He seems to be getting some fights these days with Eddie Hearn. He's sort of in the stable but not in the stable, but he is there for a fight. He was added very late in the piece for this GASHI fight, but who will Carlos Takam face in 2019? Well, it's a bit of an open question, but he's in the tent. He's going to get fights with Matchroom at this, you know, judging by what's been happening. He's fought now, what, on 2 or 3 Matchroom cards, including the one against Anthony Joshua, and obviously he fought Derek Chisora last time out before this GASHI performance. But Carlos Takam, yeah, I don't want to say it was a good performance. It was certainly a good stoppage, but he looked, you know, a bit slow and sluggish, a bit flat-footed in those early rounds. Wasn't really cutting off the ring that great. But obviously, styles make fights, and we saw 2 different styles in that fight. GASHI on his bike, making Takam look bad in the early going, but then when he stood in trade, he didn't get the better of the action, and Takam took him out. In terms of David Price and Tom Little, so I had my eye on this fight as well as the Nathan Gorman, or the latter stages of that fight. But the early going in the Price fight with Tom Little, that was certainly a bit cautious and cagey, and Tom Little was having some success. But then we fast forward to round 4, so I'll just go up to my notes here. Price was starting to get on top. He was being more aggressive, and then there was a left hook to the top of the head, and that staggered Tom Little. The leg stiffened a bit, and he looked hurt. He admitted after the fight he was hurt. So then he was covering up. David Price looked to jump on him, and then out of nowhere, the referee jumps in and stops the fight. And you can see here from this shot, Tom Little, not happy at all, pushing the ref, laying hands on the referee. You can clearly see from this photo. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, I wonder if anything's going to happen in regards to his little shove. It wasn't a big shove, but it was a shove of the referee. But clearly he was very unhappy. It was a controversial stoppage. It was an early stoppage, in my opinion. After the fight, you know, he admitted he was hurt, but he was also covering up. So look at this shot here. This is immediately prior to the stoppage. Little is still covering up. His senses may have been scrambled from the punch and he was still recovering, but he didn't go down. And he wasn't hurt to the point that he couldn't defend himself anymore. And Little said in the post-fight, he should have been given the opportunity to go down and get up. And he felt his opportunity had been ripped away. He said he was heartbroken. And I did have some sympathy for Little, because before that fourth round, he was definitely in the fight. He landed a couple of decent shots early on against David Price, and it was actually a relatively even fight for most of it. Fourth round, Price started to get on top. It did look like Price was going to have more success in this fight as it went on. And actually, if we look at the stoppage itself, or talk about the stoppage, I should say, it looked like it was heading only one way. But as Little says, he wasn't given the opportunity to go down and get up. You know, he said this is his livelihood, he's heartbroken, opportunity ripped away. So there is some who are going to say that actually the ref jumped in at the right time because it was only heading one way. I thought it was a touch early, maybe one or two more savage blows that would have ended it. Who knows? We won't get that one back. But certainly contrast that with the Takam and Gashi fight. Same referee. Paulie Malignaggi blasted him. And you could make an argument for the Gashi and Takam fight that he let it go on a little too long. After the second knockdown, it could have been called off. But in this fight, Price Little, he didn't give Little the opportunity to recover. He was still defending himself. I didn't like the stoppage one bit. Tom Little, it's hard to say where he goes. He went immediately over to the ropes and said something to Eddie Hearn. Not sure what that was. Clearly, he wants a rematch, though. That's what he's saying. David Price, he wasn't too interested in a rematch. He said, you know, he wants to move on to other things. He's, you know, obviously he embraced with Little after the fight. You know, he's friends with Little, sparred with him numerous times and such. Said he's got a lot of love for Tom Little. And Little said the same about Price. But Price, he wants to fight Lucas Browne. He said he hopes Eddie Hearn can make that fight. He said Browne has said some really disrespectful things about David Price. And that fight, who knows what could happen if that got made. That's not a fight that Lucas Browne is looking at. He's calling out all manner of guys, but he said he's not interested in David Price. He's looking for Dave Allen for Wembley for 2018. He's made other call-outs and such. But, you know, who's to say where it goes? It will really depend on money at the end of the day. But Lucas Browne and David Price, that could be some interesting action, because obviously Browne hits hard, but so does David Price. And Lucas Browne, in my opinion, he is chinny. David Price is obviously looking at this thinking, I could knock this guy out. But then Lucas Browne is looking at David Price thinking, I can knock this guy out. So who knows if it'll ever get made. I don't think it will. And in terms of the Nathan Gorman and Razvan Caggiano fight, so Gorman was taken all 12 rounds to advance to 15-0. So the scorecards for this one, 119-109, that was 2 cards, and a complete shutout on the third, 120-108. And for me, this fight, it was kind of also a bit of a tale of two halves. Nathan Gorman sort of started out, he was looking relatively slick, good footwork, very good hand speed, and the hand speed difference between the two fighters, Cojanu, who was 273 pounds for this 6'7" guy, Gorman, who's a bit shorter, 6'3", he was 200 and what did I have him at here? 248 pounds for this fight. He actually looked in better shape for this fight. The hand speed different, very apparent. Gorman having a lot of success when he was coming in, jabs, left hooks, a few other bits and pieces. He looked good in the early going. Caggiano, he had his moments, he showed flashes in those first 6 rounds. There was some decent body work that he was investing in. He was really working the right side of Gorman's body with the left hook, really ripping to the body. Caggiano just wasn't busy enough. He was in that sparring partner mode. He was getting outworked for the most part. But even those first 6 rounds, they weren't super high volume. But after 6 rounds, it really started to devolve into a low volume affair. Both guys were taking breaks, rests. Caggiano, he was complaining right throughout the fight to the referee, and the referee was having no bar of it. But It wasn't a great fight, especially in that second part of the fight. But Gorman, he went the rounds here. It was a good learning fight, and it was a comfortable win in the end. But there are some questions that I do have about Nathan Gorman. One is of power, and certainly that was a question asked of Joseph Parker after he couldn't even really rock Razvan Caggiano. Remember, Caggiano's been knocked out a couple of times before, most recently by Luis Ortiz, a devastating knockout in the second round. Gorman, like Parker, didn't really trouble Caggiano too much, so you have to ask yourself about the power of Nathan Gorman. It's a bit of an open question, and we knew that coming into this fight, but at the elite level, as he keeps stepping up, is his power going to be a factor? But I guess, you know, he is a guy that relies on his boxing skills, his speed, his technical ability, and those things were on display here. But the gas tank, that was something that I was a little concerned about, because the first 6 rounds, not incredibly high volume, but certainly he did slow down noticeably in the second half of the fight. And he was dictating the pace for the most part through this fight. So I was a bit worried that actually, you know, it wasn't a super high volume fight early on, but he looked extremely tired in the second half of the fight. Obviously, he was just fighting in burst, as was Caggiano, but Gorman was doing, you know, more than enough to win the rounds. And he went to 12 relatively comfortably in the end, but I do wonder if someone can really make him work. Is that gas tank going to be a problem? He's obviously a work in progress, 15-0. He will move on to 2019 unbeaten and looking for bigger step-up opponents. Razvan Caggiano was a good test. He did pass the test. He looked impressive in spots, but there will be some who will not be entirely happy with his performance. So the questions of power and the stamina, they're open questions for now. And we're going to see him tested again next year, hopefully in another 3 or 4 fights. It'd be good to see him in at least 3 fights, at least at the same level as Caggiano, or potentially, you know, climbing, you know, slightly higher through the ranks. But we'll see. But it was a decent performance overall. Maybe a B plus mark. Certainly it wasn't, you know, all his way. Caggiano was actually showing more ambition in this fight than he did in the Joseph Parker fight. Whether that was because Parker was giving Caggiano more problems, I don't know, but he was certainly looking to go after Gorman in spots, and he did actually show that he does have some decent skills, but he just doesn't, you know, fight in long enough bursts. It was just kind of, you know, he'd open up for a few seconds and then cover up again back into sparring partner mode. But yeah, a decent win for Gorman. He moves on. What did you make of these fights? Tom Little and David Price. Controversial stoppage in my view. Carlos Takam and SENAD GASHI, a bit of a sort of tale of 2 fights really, because the first 4 rounds, borefest. Second half, the last 3 rounds, it was an excitement machine. And a decent stoppage for Takam. But is Carlos Takam, is he showing his age now? Those first few rounds, he looked every bit of his 38 years old. And then we have the Gorman and Caggiano fight. Gorman makes it through. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.